Most people thought the North York moors were just lonely hills, a place where the sky pressed down and every wind sounded like a warning. But to Lauren Harper, everyone called her Laws. They were ghosts, haunted by memories and promises she'd never kept. The battered Land Rover rumbled up a muddy track, headlights barely cutting the thick rain. Laws gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles pale. It had been years since she'd been home. Her father's funeral was already over, the farm left to her in a lawyer's envelope, nothing but guilt and a new set of keys in her pocket. Her mind kept drifting back to Syria, not the country, just the sound of gunfire echoing in concrete halls, the stench of blood and fear, the way time slowed when you were the one meant to save a life but couldn't. That was her curse, and the silence of this place only made the memories louder. She drove on, windows fogged, the old dog tags around her neck tapping against the steering wheel with each jolt. The farmhouse looked smaller than she remembered. Everything did. As she stepped out, the wind nearly knocked her sideways, her boots sinking into slick mud. The door stuck, of course it did, so she had to shoulder it open, the smell of dust and old hay hitting her all at once. She dropped her duffel by the stairs. Upstairs, her father's room was still untouched, as if he might walk in any moment. She didn't dare enter. Thunder cracked, the kind that shakes walls and rattles your chest. Laws cursed under her breath, pulled her jacket tighter, and went to check the barn out of habit. Flashlight bouncing off piles of broken tools and moldy sacks. Nothing but the wind and rain. She was halfway to the back door when she saw it. A flash of movement outside the window. Something big, dark, and wild. She froze, heart pounding. Another flash. There, out on the moor, just past the half-collapsed stone wall, a horse reared up, black against the lightning. Its mane whipped, nostrils flared. For a second, it looked straight at her. Laws stared back, something ancient and cold moving through her veins. The pony. No, a fell pony, she realized, half wild and all muscle, turned and bolted into the night. A normal person would have locked the door and called it a night. Laws was never normal. She grabbed her boots, shrugged on her soaked jacket, and sprinted out into the storm, the wind howling so hard it stole her breath. Mud sucked at her feet. She followed the tracks, head low, flashlight flickering. Rain stung her face, water running down her neck. The pony's hoofprints led her up the ridge, toward the old Cold War post her father used to joke about, the place where he'd once dared her to spend the night. It was barely a ruin now. Graffiti on the concrete, moss choking the entrance, the old warning sign hanging crooked. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the post for a split second. There, the pony again, standing at the edge, ears pinned. But when Laws got close, it bolted, vanishing into the darkness like a ghost. She tried to follow, feet slipping. The world went sideways for a second as she crashed into the doorframe, breath ragged. Inside it was darker than pitch, just the sound of water dripping and the wind shrieking through cracks. Laws hesitated. Something was wrong. It wasn't just the pony. There was another sound, a low groan, barely audible over the storm. She swung her light. At the back, half curled against the damp wall, was a man, soaked, shivering, face almost blue. He looked up with glazed eyes, tried to speak, but nothing came out. In his arms, he clutched a battered tin box, rust flaking off in sheets. Panic crashed over her, but instinct took over. She dropped to her knees. "Hey, can you hear me? Hey!" No answer. Laws shook him, then checked his pulse, slow, thready, hypothermia. She didn't even think, just moved, jacket off, wrapped around him, hands on his cheeks to try and get him to focus. He was mumbling something. The post, the box, Albert. But the words made no sense. Laws swore again. She had to get him out, and fast. It wasn't easy. He was heavy and half out of it, but she managed to drag him, inch by inch, into the storm, her boots slipping. The wind fought her every step. She stumbled, almost fell, but refused to let go. Every step was a battle, rain blinding her, cold seeping through her bones. By the time she got him into the back seat of the Land Rover, she was shaking as hard as he was. The tin box was still clenched in his hands. She slammed the door, jammed the keys into the ignition, and floored it, wheels spinning in the mud. Headlights cut through the darkness as she barreled down the track, heart pounding. The man was still muttering, voice thin, "Forgive me, couldn't stop it." And Laws kept shouting at him to stay awake, punching the horn as she hit flooded dips and hidden potholes. The storm was getting worse. Every second counted. In the mirror, she saw the fell pony, Storm, watching from the side of the road, mane streaming in the wind. Maybe it was a trick of the rain, but for a moment, Laws felt like the world was trying to tell her something. She didn't know if the man in her back seat would make it. She didn't even know his name. But she knew this. The past never stayed buried. Not here. Not anywhere. As the Land Rover roared into the night, she gritted her teeth, bracing for whatever came next. Because coming home wasn't supposed to be easy, and she had the scars to prove it. The wipers struggled to keep up with the storm as Laws tore down the twisting country road, the battered Land Rover rattling with every rut. The man she'd dragged from the Cold War post was barely conscious in the back seat, drenched, lips gray, arms clutching that old tin box as if it were a lifeline. Laws glanced in the rear view, heart pounding, watching for any sign he was slipping away for good. "Don't close your eyes. Hey, stay with me," she shouted over the storm, voice raw. He mumbled something, eyes fluttering, breath fogging the cracked window. "The post. Albert, I couldn't stop it." She bit her lip, fighting panic. The Moor roads were flooding fast, rivulets streaming over the pavement. She gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white, swerving to avoid fallen branches and half-submerged potholes. Every minute felt like a race against death. The man kept mumbling, sometimes feverish, sometimes lucid, always coming back to the same words. "Albert, forgive me, the box." She floored it past the old stone pub, headlights slicing through rain. The nearest hospital was 20 miles away, down winding lanes that twisted like a bad dream. Laws pressed on, teeth gritted, mind running through every trauma protocol she knew. Hypothermia, get him dry, get him warm, fluids, oxygen. She cursed herself for not having a first aid kit in the car. "Come on, just hang on." She was already planning what she'd say to the ER. Found him out on the moor, barely breathing, didn't get his name. Her mind drifted back to the post, the way his body had been curled around that tin box, like it was both a shield and a burden. What the hell was in it? The man groaned. Laws snapped back to the present. "What's your name? Can you tell me your name?" No answer, just a rattling breath. She drove faster, sliding around a sharp bend, heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her father would have cursed her for driving like this, but right now, she didn't care. She just needed to keep this stranger alive. Finally, the hospital's lights appeared ahead. A low, gray building, ugly but solid. She skidded into the ambulance bay, slammed the shifter into park, and jumped out, yanking open the rear door. "Help! I need help!" she yelled into the rain, waving her arms. A nurse and an orderly came running, wheeling out a gurney. Together, they got the man out. His fingers had to be pried off the tin box, but he didn't resist. Laws shoved it into her bag, figuring it was important enough to risk the nurse's scowl. Found him up on the moor in the old Arrock post. Hypothermia, possible exposure. She rattled off as they rolled him through the doors. Fluorescent lights buzzed. The smell of antiseptic hit her. And suddenly she was back in field hospitals overseas. The tension coiled tight between her shoulder blades. Doctors worked fast. IVs, warm blankets, oxygen mask. Laws hovered by the curtain, soaked and shaking, mind still racing. Eventually, a doctor came out, gray-haired, eyes tired but kind. "You brought him in just in time," he said. "He's hypothermic but stable for now. Do you know who he is?" Laws shook her head. "No idea. He kept saying Albert and the post. That's all I got." The doctor nodded, jotting it down. "We'll try to get his details once he's awake. You did good, Ms. Harper, Lauren Harper." The doctor offered a rare smile. "You did good, Ms. Harper. Saved his life, likely." That phrase landed heavy. She'd been too late too many times before. Now, finally, someone had made it. A nurse appeared. "He's asking for you." Laws hesitated. She didn't know why, but she felt drawn to the man. Not just because she'd saved him, but because of the mystery he carried, the sense that she'd stumbled onto something bigger than either of them. Inside, the man lay swaddled in blankets, eyes half open, face drawn and rugged. Late 40s, maybe, stubble peppered with gray, hair tangled from the rain. "You got me out?" he rasped, voice hoarse but grateful. Laws nodded. "Dragged you through half the moor, but you're alive." He managed a weak smile. "Thank you. I'm Jim. Jim Carter." Laws raised an eyebrow. "Carter? Like the name on the post?" Jim nodded, struggling to sit up. "Albert Carter was my great-uncle. He was stationed there in the 60s. I was researching his story, trying to figure out what really happened." He glanced at Laws's bag. "The box. Did you get it?" Laws nodded, pulling it out and setting it on the bed. Jim's hands trembled as he opened the rusted lid. Inside were faded logs, old photographs, and a folded scrap of yellowed paper. Jim stared at them, jaw clenched. "I've been searching for these for years. My family never talked about Albert, just said he went mad, saw things in that post that ruined him. But I knew there was more." Laws leaned in. "What's in there?" Jim pulled out the paper, eyes scanning the spidery handwriting. "It's a note from Albert, says, 'I couldn't stop it, forgive me.'" The words hung in the air, heavy as thunder. Laws frowned, feeling a chill run through her. "Stop what?" Jim shook his head, haunted. "That's what I've been trying to find out. There was an incident, 1963, I think. Something bad happened at the post. The ministry covered it up. Albert never spoke of it, not even to his wife." Laws stared at the box, mind spinning. She had a dozen questions, but the exhaustion of the night pressed down on her. "Rest," she said. "We'll figure this out tomorrow." Jim nodded, eyes closing, still clutching the note. Laws slipped out into the hallway, sitting down hard on the plastic chair. Rain tapped the windows. Her hands shook. What had she gotten herself into? Her phone buzzed, voicemail from her father's old friend, just checking if she was settling in. She didn't answer. She just sat, listening to the storm outside. Mind caught between the weight of the past and the mystery in that battered tin box. The world had changed in one night. And somehow, she knew, this was only the beginning. Dawn came slow and cold, gray light seeping through the hospital windows and tracing every line on Law's tired face. She sat in a stiff-backed chair outside Jim Carter's room, head resting against the pale green wall, her mind drifting in and out of uneasy sleep. Nurses came and went with the calm rhythm of people who'd seen everything. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped steady as a heartbeat. Laws felt oddly out of place, as if she'd wandered into someone else's story and wasn't sure whether to stay or run. Eventually, she stood and pushed open the door to Jim's room. He was awake, propped against the pillows, staring at the battered tin box on his lap. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rain streaked the window behind him, making the world outside look watery and distant. Laws broke the silence with a soft, "How are you feeling?" Jim offered a crooked smile, voice scratchy but steady. "Like I got run over by a tractor but alive, thanks to you." She shrugged, settling into the chair beside his bed, stretching out her stiff legs. "Lucky I was out there. Most people would have shut the door and gone to bed." Jim nodded, picking at the blanket. "That's the thing about people. Sometimes it's the ones who shouldn't be there who show up when it matters." He paused, meeting her eyes. "You're not from around here, are you?" Laws shook her head. "I grew up here but left a long time ago. Army. I've been all over, I guess. Only came back for the funeral." He looked at her for a long moment. "Your dad?" "Yeah, I missed it." The words were flat, but the pain behind them made Jim glance away, giving her a sliver of privacy in her grief. Laws didn't like talking about her father. She didn't like talking about the past at all. But something about Jim made it easier. Not because he pried, but because he understood the weight of regret. "He left me the farm," she said quietly. "Guess he figured I'd come back eventually." Jim tapped the tin box. "My family never leaves you much choice either. My mom used to say history isn't just about the past. It's the stuff you carry with you, whether you want it or not." Laws gave a small, wry laugh. "Is that why you're out chasing ghosts in the middle of a storm?" He nodded, looking away. "I guess so. Albert Carter, my great-uncle, he's the reason I became a historian. My family acts like he never existed. After the army, he just disappeared. The post, the cover-up, the silence. I needed to know what really happened." He gestured at the box. "That's why I kept coming back to that place. I thought if I could find something, anything, maybe I could prove Albert wasn't a coward. Maybe I could prove something about myself too." Laws understood that. Maybe too well. The need to prove yourself, to make sense of pain you couldn't fix. "You ever find answers?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "Not yet. All I ever found were rumors and dead ends." He pushed the logs across the tray table. "You can look if you want. It's mostly weather reports and shift rosters, but this..." He held up the faded note. "This is the only thing that matters. I couldn't stop it. Forgive me." What was he trying to stop? Who's supposed to forgive him? Laws read the words again, heart heavy. Maybe it's not about answers. Maybe it's about not letting it go. The silence grew. Finally, Jim sat back, eyes closed, his body finally relaxing. "I haven't talked to anyone about this in years," he said. "Not really. My family thinks I'm obsessed. Maybe I am." Laws shook her head. "Sometimes you need someone else to look at the mess with you. Makes it feel less like drowning." A knock interrupted them. A cheerful nurse stuck her head in. "Mr. Carter, you have a visitor." "Oh, and Ms. Harper, the social worker is waiting downstairs if you'd like to meet the local veterans group." They're having coffee in the canteen. Laws blinked in surprise. Didn't know there was a group. Started last year, the nurse smiled. Nice people. You should check them out. With that, she vanished down the hall. Laws hesitated. She hadn't planned to stay long in this town, let alone get tangled up in local causes. But the idea of being around others who'd seen war, who might understand the silence that followed, pulled at her. You gonna be okay? She asked Jim. He nodded, already reaching for the box again. Go on. I'm not going anywhere. Downstairs, the hospital canteen smelled of instant coffee and toast. At a back table sat a small group, men and women, some with crutches, others with stiff military posture, all wearing that look of people who'd learned not to flinch. A bearded man in a wheelchair waved her over. Lauren Harper, right? Laws? Laws nodded. Word travels fast. He grinned. In towns like this, nothing stays secret. I'm Mike, ex-RAF. This is Rita, Tom, and Jade. They made space, handed her a cup of tea. Laws felt herself relax, just a little. Conversation was easy, filled with banter and the kind of dark humor that only made sense to those who'd served. Rita asked about her dad, Tom about Syria, Jade about her plans for the farm. Laws answered what she could, letting her guard down by inches. It wasn't therapy, but it was the closest thing she'd felt to belonging in a long time. Someone asked what she'd been doing last night, out in the storm. Laws hesitated, then told them, leaving out the worst of it, but mentioning the pony, the old post, and the man she'd found. You're braver than most, Mike said. Most folks stay away from that post. Says it's cursed. Rita laughed. Everything on the moors is cursed, according to you. Mike just shrugged. Sometimes it's better to dig up the past, see what you're really afraid of. Later, Laws left with a flyer and a new sense of possibility. Maybe she didn't have to face all this alone. Upstairs, she found Jim more awake, color back in his cheeks. The logs, want to go through them with me later? He asked. Laws nodded. Let's do it together. I think we owe it to Albert. And ourselves. As she left the hospital that afternoon, clouds breaking over the moors, she felt the weight of the farm keys in her pocket, the faint trace of hope in her chest, and the certainty that this story wasn't done. Not for her, not for Jim, and not for the ghosts of Carter's Post. The sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, painting the North York moors in sharp relief. Mud and heather stretched out in waves, the wind sharp enough to sting. Laws parked her Land Rover at the edge of the old farm track, boots sinking into the grass as she stepped out. Jim Carter met her by the fence, still looking pale but more himself, a backpack slung over his shoulder and that same battered tin box tucked under his arm. They didn't say much at first, just trudged side by side up the path toward the Cold War observation post. It squatted on the ridge, concrete gray and stubborn, half swallowed by brambles and moss. Laws paused, hand on the rusted gate, looking out over the hills. I used to come up here with my dad, she said quietly. He said this was where the world would end, but all I ever found was rabbits and old beer cans. Jim gave a small, sad smile. My uncle used to say the same thing, except he saw it happen, or thought he did. The inside of the post was cold and damp, reeking of wet stone and the faint metallic tang of old radio equipment. Graffiti covered one wall, names, dates, some faded so much they were little more than ghosts. Jim ran his hand along the concrete, searching, eyes hungry for clues. There's a hatch somewhere, he said, voice low. Albert mentioned it in his logs. Emergency storage under the floor. Laws knelt down, brushing aside leaves and broken glass. She found the outline of a trap door, half hidden beneath a pile of rotted boards and tangled wire. Here. Jim crouched next to her, pulling a small crowbar from his backpack. Together they pried at the rusted hinges, straining until the latch finally gave way with a squeal. The hatch swung open, revealing a steep set of steps vanishing into darkness. Ladies first, Jim joked, but his voice was tight, uncertain. Laws clicked on her flashlight and descended, boots thudding against cold concrete. The air was colder down here, thick with damp. A small storage room opened out, old radios stacked on a table, boxes of ration tins, and a line of file folders gone soft and swollen from years of rainwater trickling through cracks above. Jim followed, flashlight beam darting. "This is it," he breathed, reverent and anxious at once. Laws started opening boxes, searching for anything that looked out of place. Jim focused on the files, hands shaking as he opened the first one and read the cover. Training exercise, November 1963. Inside, pages were brittle, some water-damaged, others crisp and untouched. There was a logbook, entries in neat, formal handwriting. Albert Carter's name appeared again and again, each entry a fragment of routine, patrols, supply drops, weather. And then, November 17th, 1963, his handwriting changed, jagged and urgent. Jim read aloud, voice barely above a whisper. Exercise gone wrong. 2 civilians on moor after curfew. Warning shots fired, confusion, shouting. Reported as accident, but... He broke off, eyes wide. Laws peered over his shoulder, tracing the words. He saw it happen. Jim nodded, voice shaking. Albert's squad opened fire. He wrote, "I falsified my report. Said it was an accident, but God forgive me, it wasn't. MOD hushed it up, threatened us all. I stayed silent." The words made Laws's stomach turn. She knew about cover-ups, had seen enough of them in war zones. "He carried this for decades," she said softly. "No wonder it broke him." Jim's hands balled into fists. "If this comes out, it'll ruin what's left of his name. My family won't forgive me." Laws met his gaze. "You can't bury the truth forever, Jim. That's what killed him. That's what kills all of us in the end." The silence that followed was thick and heavy, broken only by the drip of water and the scuffle of rats somewhere in the dark. Jim closed the logbook, face drawn. "What do we do now?" Laws looked around the tiny, cramped room, the weight of history pressing in on her. "We bring it into the light, but we do it right. Not for revenge, not to shame your family, but because people deserve to know." She stood and stretched, shaking off the cold. "Come on, let's get some air." Upstairs, the wind hit her like a slap, full of rain and salt. She leaned against the old wall, heart pounding. Jim followed, logbook clutched tight, tin box tucked under his arm. "I don't know if I can," he said quietly. "If you're scared, that means it matters," Laws replied, her voice flat but gentle. "And you're not alone. I'll help you." For a moment, Jim said nothing, just stared at the moor, the clouds blowing fast overhead. Then, with a shaky nod, he agreed. "Okay, we'll do it together." The words sounded like a promise. They started back toward the farm, silent but bound by something new, a shared purpose. Halfway down the path, Laws paused, her boot nudging something half buried in the mud. She bent down, fingers brushing aside the earth, and pulled free a battered metal dog tag, the name A. Carter still barely legible. She handed it to Jim, who stared at it in awe, eyes shining with tears he refused to let fall. That night, after cleaning up and warming by the stove, Laws opened her laptop and started drafting a plan. She'd help Jim bring the truth to light, but it wouldn't be easy. She'd need allies, support from people who cared about more than old secrets. She remembered the veterans group, the way their eyes had softened when she'd told her story. Maybe they could help. Maybe the past wasn't just something you survived, but something you could use to heal. Jim sent her a message before bed. "Thank you. Couldn't have done this without you." Laws stared at the screen for a long moment, the weight of the day settling in her bones. She'd come home expecting only ghosts. Instead, she'd found a purpose, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, the truth could set them free. A sharp wind whipped across the moor, carrying the bite of autumn, as Laws stood beside Jim at the battered wooden table in her kitchen. The room smelled faintly of coffee and wet wool, both of them hunched over Albert Carter's logbook and a stack of scanned documents. Sunlight angled in through the dusty window, catching on the tin box that had started all this. Outside, crows circled the empty farm fields, dark shapes against the pale sky. Laws clicked her pen, staring at the rough plan she'd scrawled on a pad. "We can't just drop this on social media and hope for the best. Nobody trusts stories like this unless you show them proof." Jim nodded, jaw tight, rubbing at the stubble on his chin. "I know, but what if it all blows back on us? My family, the locals, most of them want the past left buried. I've already had cousins calling me, saying I'm stirring up trouble." He closed the logbook with a snap, voice low. Albert was their uncle too. They still call him a hero. Laws shook her head. A real hero admits when something's broken. He tried to fix it. He just didn't have anyone to help him. She leaned over the laptop, pulling up a crowdfunding page she'd started the night before, still blank except for a photo of the observation post, gray and lonely under a bruised sky. "We start small. Restore the post as a memorial. Tell the real story, not just Albert's, but everyone's. That'll draw support, not just anger." She'd barely finished the sentence when a loud bang shook the window. Startled, Laws went to the porch, where a note was nailed to the gate, the paper flapping wildly. She tore it off, scanning the jagged handwriting. "Leave the past buried or you'll regret it." No signature, just a muddy boot print below. Laws's heart thudded. She went back inside, showing Jim. "Guess some folks are scared of the truth." Jim read the note, his face going pale. It started, "My uncle always said the moor keeps its secrets for a reason." "Yeah, well, I'm not scared of a few threats," Laws said, but inside unease crept in. Her phone buzzed, an alert from the crowdfunding page. Donations, 50 Salksers, then 10, then $100 with the note, "For those who remember." Another ping, this one angrier. "Don't waste money on ghosts." She showed Jim the screen. "It's working. Some people want this, even if others want us gone." By mid-morning, news had spread across the village. Laws overheard voices at the hardware store. "Why is she stirring things up? Place is dangerous, should be knocked down." And at the bakery, "Good for her. Finally someone cares about the truth." The divide was sharp. Every conversation edged with suspicion or hope. When she stopped at the feed store, a local farmer, thick-set and red-faced, blocked her path. "You the one trespassing up at the old post?" he barked. Laws kept her tone calm. "I'm not trespassing. I'm trying to save it. There's history up there, and people deserve to know it." The farmer jabbed a finger at her chest. "You keep poking around, and I'll call the police. That place is a death trap. Last thing we need is more outsiders." She didn't back down. You do what you have to, but I'm not walking away. He grumbled something about stubborn city folks, then stalked off, slamming his truck door hard enough to rattle the windows. Back at the farmhouse, Jim waited with a drone kit, one of his cousins, borrowed for the day. If we want people to help, we need to prove the post is worth saving, he said, assembling the tiny machine with shaking hands. Together they trekked back up the muddy path, wind tearing at their jackets, drone case bouncing against Laws's hip. The post looked more fragile in the daylight, cracks spiderwebbing across the roof, moss and lichen spreading like bruises. Jim flew the drone in slow arcs over the roof, Laws watching the live feed on his phone. "Look, there, see the line?" she said, pointing at a deep split running from the chimney to the north wall. "That could come down any day." Jim swallowed hard. "If it collapses, the evidence goes with it. We have to work fast." Just then, a car pulled up at the end of the lane. The same farmer, now with 2 more men, arms crossed, faces grim. "You're not welcome here," one called out. "This land isn't safe. We warned you." Laws walked to the gate, adrenaline burning away any fear. "This post belongs to everyone. If you've got a problem, call the council. But you're not scaring me off." The men muttered, but no one crossed the gate. She went back to Jim, who was shaking as he landed the drone. "That's not going to be the last of them, is it?" he asked, voice quiet. "No," she said, "but it means we're getting close." As dusk settled, Laws uploaded the drone footage to the crowdfunding site, highlighting the urgent repairs needed. Donations trickled in, some small, some anonymous, others with comments. "My grandfather served there. Truth matters. Don't let the past be erased." But the threats kept coming, too. Nasty messages, slashed tires on Jim's car, a dead bird left on Laws's porch. Still, they pressed on. In the quiet of her kitchen that night, Laws opened her father's old ledger, flipping past livestock notes and bills. On the inside cover, in her dad's neat handwriting, was a single phrase: "If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything." Laws smiled, a lump in her throat. She texted Jim, "We keep going, no matter what." That night, with wind howling outside and her heart pounding with equal parts fear and determination, Laws realized she wasn't just fighting for Albert Carter. She was fighting for everyone who'd ever been silenced by shame, fear, or lies. And for the first time, she felt the weight of the moor not as a burden, but as a promise. A truth waiting, at last, to come into the light. The wind screamed across the moors, rattling loose slates on the barn roof and sending clouds racing overhead. Laws shoved her hands deeper into her coat pockets, head down against the chill as she made her way up the track with Jim. Their faces were set, grim but determined, battered by the elements and the cold stares of villagers who watched from behind drawn curtains. Today they weren't stopping for threats or second-guessing. They were here to work, to save the post before it became nothing but rubble and rumor. The post rose before them, battered and hunched, its roofline now visibly sagging under the strain of years and the wild weather. Jim paused, frowning up at the cracks that had spread since yesterday. "I don't like the look of that," he muttered, voice tense. Laws set her jaw. "We don't have time to wait. We clear what we can, get the logs and radios out, and then, if the roof goes, at least the evidence is safe." Inside, the air was thick with dust and the musty scent of old paper. Every step sent little showers of debris drifting down from above. Laws grabbed a length of pipe and began levering aside fallen boards, careful but quick, sweat starting under her collar despite the chill. Jim followed, boxing up files, snapping photos of every tag, every faded page. They were halfway through stacking the last of the ration tins near the hatch when a low, ominous creak rumbled through the concrete. Laws's blood ran cold. "Did you hear that?" Jim's eyes went wide. "The roof!" he started, but the words cut off as a sharp crack split the air. Everything happened at once. The ceiling over the hatch gave way with a roar, chunks of concrete and tangled rebar slamming down. Laws barely had time to twist away, but a heavy beam pinned her left leg, pain blazing like fire through her whole body. Dust filled her mouth and nose, the world spinning in gray darkness. Somewhere behind her, Jim shouted, the sound muffled and frantic. "Laws! Laws, are you okay? Talk to me!" She coughed, spitting grit, the beam crushing her knee so hard she thought she might black out. "Jim, I'm stuck, can't move my leg," she gasped, fighting to keep her breathing slow. The panic nipped at her, the old terror from Syria clawing up her spine, buried alive, no way out, just the sound of her own pulse roaring in her ears. "Don't leave," she choked. But then, just outside, there was another sound, hooves pounding, wild and insistent. Storm, the fell pony, whinnied and tossed his head, circling the ruined entrance, as if calling for help. Jim scrambled up the collapsed rubble, cursing and flinging aside boards and broken tiles, his hands raw and bleeding. He called to Storm, voice hoarse. "Go, boy! Get help! Go!" The pony bolted into the wind, disappearing down the track. Back inside, Laws fought the tears, stinging her eyes. She tried to lever the beam with a length of pipe, but the pain was too much. Her vision blurred. "Jim, if you can't get me out, you go, okay?" Jim ignored her. "No way, I'm not leaving you." He grunted, bracing himself and wedging the pipe under the beam. Inch by inch, he shifted it, sweat pouring down his face. "Come on, just a little more." With a final, desperate heave, Jim shoved the beam just enough for Laws to pull her leg free. She collapsed into his arms, breath coming in ragged gasps, ankle twisted and blood trickling down her shin. "You did it," she whispered, fighting back a sob. "You actually—" "Don't thank me yet," he panted, helping her limp outside. "We need to get you to the hospital." They barely made it out before the rest of the roof caved in, dust and debris billowing out in a choking cloud. For a moment, they just stood there, staring at what was left. The post, now little more than a broken shell. Years of secrets exposed to the sky. Laws sagged against Jim, every muscle shaking. But as the dust cleared, she saw something sticking out from the rubble. A battered leather log wedged beneath a fallen slab. Laws limped over, heart pounding, and pulled it free. It was different from the others, older, the pages stiff with age and water. On the inside cover, in Albert Carter's spidery hand, was a date, November 23rd, 1963. Below it, a single line. "If you are reading this, I couldn't live with the lie anymore." She flipped through the pages, hands trembling. The writing was rushed, almost desperate. "We were told to fire warning shots, but someone panicked. Civilians down, blood on the snow. I couldn't tell the truth. They made me change my report. Forgive me, for I condemned the innocent to silence. I thought I was protecting my men, but I was just protecting myself. To whoever finds this, don't let them be forgotten." Jim read over her shoulder, his eyes wide and shining with tears. "He confessed," he breathed. "He told the truth. He just hid it all this time." Laws closed the log, gripping it tight. "Now it's out. We can finish this, Jim. For Albert. For everyone." The ride back to the hospital was a blur of pain and adrenaline. Storm racing beside the Land Rover, whinnying at every turn. Jim wouldn't let Laws doze, shaking her shoulder every time she started to fade. "Stay with me, almost there," he muttered, worry etched deep into his face. At the ER, nurses rushed her inside, tutting over her bruised and bleeding leg, but Laws wouldn't let go of the log. Not until she was sure Jim had it, safe and dry. Later, lying in a sterile hospital bed, Laws stared at the ceiling, every inch of her aching. But she felt something fierce and bright burning inside her, a sense of purpose she hadn't known in years. She'd nearly died under that roof, but instead, she'd uncovered the last piece of the story. And now, no threat or warning could stop them. Jim sat beside her, holding the log in both hands. "You could have died." Laws managed a tired smile. "I've been through worse." She squeezed his arm. "We finish what we started. No more secrets. Not for Albert. Not for anyone." Outside, the wind died, and for the first time in days, the moor was silent. News of the collapse and Laws's rescue spread through the village faster than any storm. By morning, her phone was blowing up with messages, some from strangers, others from folks she barely remembered from her childhood. "You okay, lass? Heard you nearly got yourself killed. Need anything?" She read everyone from her hospital bed, leg braced and stitched, painkillers dulling the worst of it, but not the ache of almost losing everything. Jim sat nearby, logbook in his lap, fielding questions from police, councilmen, and even a local reporter who'd caught wind of the whole story. For the first time since she'd returned, Laws felt less like an outsider and more like someone who belonged, scars and all. Word had gotten around. She'd gone into the ruins not for glory, but for truth, and nearly paid the highest price. People respected that in the North York moors. It was a hard place, and hard places bred stubborn, loyal hearts. By noon, Mike from the veterans group arrived, along with Rita and Tom, arms full of flowers and biscuits, their laughter chasing out the sterile hospital gloom. Mike looked her over, shaking his head. "You always did pick the rough end of a fight, Harper," he joked. Laws tried to grin, though her face hurt from the effort. "Somebody's got to do it." Rita squeezed her hand. "Everyone's talking, you know, about what you found, about what you're doing. There's a real buzz out there." That afternoon, when Laws was released, she returned home to find the farm alive with activity. Cars lined the muddy track, boots stomping through the kitchen, voices calling out from the barn. A crowd had gathered, shovels in hand, food on the stove, even a battered JCB at the ready. The moorland community, often so private and divided, had come together. Old feuds were set aside for something bigger. Jim looked overwhelmed, blinking in the sunlight, as people stopped to thank him or ask questions about Albert's story. A wiry mechanic named Glenn volunteered to fix Jim's car, which had mysteriously had its tires slashed again the night before. "Can't have good people walking to the hospital, can we?" he said with a wink. Even the farmer who'd threatened Laws days earlier turned up, arms crossed, mumbling something about not holding grudges when it comes to the truth. He left behind a tray of sausage rolls and a surprisingly heartfelt, "Stay safe." Laws hobbled into the kitchen, crutch under one arm, heart thumping at the sight of so many faces. Jade from the veterans group pressed a mug of tea into her hands. "There's a bonfire night planned," she said, eyes bright. "Up by the post. Well, what's left of it. We're raising money for repairs and for veterans' mental health. Local bands, food trucks, the lot. Everyone's invited. You'll come?" Laws nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd never seen her home like this. Open, busy, alive. As dusk fell, the event took shape at the edge of the moor. Families arrived in boots and raincoats, children chasing each other over the rough ground. A band played old folk songs from the back of a flatbed truck. The fire roared to life, sending sparks high into the wind. Food passed from hand to hand. Pies, cakes, mugs of soup. Someone hung lanterns in the trees, and for a moment, the post, battered but still standing, was the brightest spot for miles around. Jim took the stage with Mike and Rita, the logbook in his hands. He told the crowd the story. No more secrets, no more whispers. He spoke of Albert Carter, the soldiers, the civilians, the burden of silence, and the desperate need for honesty, even when it hurt. His voice trembled at times, but he never looked away. Laws stood in the crowd, surrounded by old friends and new, tears stinging her eyes as Jim's words washed over everyone. As he finished, Storm, the fell pony, trotted through the edge of the crowd, mane wild in the firelight. He nudged a small boy who had wandered off toward the darkness, guiding him back to his anxious parents. Laughter and cheers followed Storm through the night, the pony's quiet heroism now legendary, his presence a symbol of something untamed yet good in all of them. For the first time since coming home, Laws felt hope bloom in her chest, a fragile thing, but real. The pain in her leg faded as she listened to neighbors tell their own stories of loss and healing, of mistakes made and lessons learned. Even the skeptics in the village softened, drawn in by the fire's warmth and the simple, honest celebration of community. If the moor had always been a place of secrets and solitude, tonight it was something else, a place of healing. At the end of the night, as the last song faded and the embers glowed red, Jim found Laws sitting on a log, lost in the fire's flicker. He sat beside her, bumping her shoulder. "You did it," he said, voice low. "You brought them all together." Laws shook her head, a small smile curving her lips. "We did it. You, me, Albert, even Storm." She watched the pony grazing quietly, a living legend among them. Maybe this is what my dad wanted for me, for all of us, to come back and face what was broken. Jim nodded. It's more than just fixing the post. It's about not running away anymore. She looked up at the sky, thick with stars, and let herself believe that, for once, the moor wasn't haunted by loss, but lit up by hope. The night felt endless, full of promise. The story not finished, but finally heading somewhere worth going. Morning broke cold and blue, fog spilling down from the high ridges to pool in the folds of the moor. Laws woke before sunrise, the ache in her leg sharp, but nothing compared to the anxious weight in her chest. Today was the day they would share Albert's confession, not just with a handful of locals, but with everyone who'd been drawn into the story. Everyone who had followed the growing viral posts, the press, the distant relatives, the neighbors. She took a long breath, feeling the cold air fill her lungs, bracing herself. At the edge of the farm, people were already gathering, drawn by a sense that something important was about to happen. The old observation post stood battered and half-collapsed, but someone had strung up bunting, and kids chased each other through puddles, boots splashing. A large tent was pitched beside the ruins, borrowed chairs and hay bales lined up for seats, the local paper's photographer lurking near the edge of the crowd. Someone had hung a sign above the tent, "For those who remember." Jim stood at the front, face pale, logbook clutched to his chest. Laws found him there, hands trembling as he flipped the battered pages one last time. "You ready?" she asked quietly, her voice a whisper just for him. He shook his head. Not even close, but it's time. She squeezed his arm, feeling his fear and his strength. You're not alone. We'll do this together. The tent filled up fast. At the back, Mike and the other veterans settled in, sharing knowing glances with Laws. Even the farmer who'd once threatened them was there, a grim look on his face, his wife's hand tight on his arm. Storm the pony grazed nearby, oblivious to everything except the crisp grass and the attention of every child who could get close. Jim took the microphone, his voice barely above a whisper at first, cracking like frost underfoot. He told them the story, how Albert Carter had come home from the army broken and silent, haunted by things he'd never been able to confess. How that silence had twisted through their family for generations, shaping the stories they told about themselves and each other. He spoke about finding the logs, reading the words his uncle had written, with hands shaking in fear and shame. He read aloud the confession, the moment Albert admitted he'd changed his report, that he'd lied to save his men and condemned 2 civilians to be forgotten. As Jim's words echoed in the cold morning air, the tent fell silent, everyone hanging on the raw, painful truth. He kept going, tears streaking his face. I wanted to believe Albert was a hero, he said, voice trembling. But real heroes don't always get medals. Sometimes they carry shame so the rest of us can sleep. Sometimes they're just men who made mistakes and lived with them. For years, I hated Albert for what he did. But today I want to forgive him. And I want you to know the truth. Because the truth heals more than silence ever could. He finished, chest heaving, and for a long moment no one moved. Laws stepped forward, her own voice breaking as she took the microphone. My whole life I thought running away was the answer. I thought I could outpace my past, my failures, my pain, the people I lost. But you can't run forever. Coming back here, helping Jim, facing what really happened, it hurt. It hurt a lot. But hiding just makes the pain last longer. She looked at the crowd, really looked at the veterans, the widows, the kids who would inherit this place and its history. If you're carrying something like Albert did, if you're scared of what people might say, let this be your sign. It's not too late to tell the truth. It's not too late to forgive yourself. She handed the microphone to Mike, who added his own story, how he'd lost friends not to war, but to silence, to the weight of secrets that no one should have to bear alone. Rita talked about mental health, about the ways community could heal wounds that never quite closed. The farmer spoke, voice thick with emotion, about mistakes made in anger and the power of second chances. Stories spilled out, one after another, pain and hope woven together. The community's wounds no longer hidden but shared, finally seen. Jim posted scans of Albert's log and the confession online, along with a letter explaining everything, what had been covered up, what had been lost, and why the truth mattered. Within hours, the story spread, shared and reposted by locals, veterans, even journalists from the BBC. Comments poured in. My uncle served there. He never talked about it. Thank you for having the courage. We all have ghosts. Time to let them rest. By afternoon, reporters called for interviews. Donations soared. Messages arrived from families who had never known why their loved ones never came home. From children of veterans who finally understood their parents' silences. The observation post, once forgotten, almost erased, became a symbol, its broken walls now part of something whole. Even Storm, the pony, made it into the news. The moor's silent guardian, as one headline read. As dusk fell, Laws and Jim stood side by side on the ridge, looking out over the moor, The sky was streaked with violet and gold, the wind carrying the sound of laughter from the village. Jim pressed the old logbook into Laws's hands. "I thought this would destroy my family," he said quietly. "But I think maybe it saved us. Saved me." Laws squeezed his hand, voice gentle. "That's what the truth does. It breaks things open, but it lets the light in." For the first time in years, Jim's shoulders relaxed. Laws looked at the battered post, at the people gathering in its shadow. She realized that stories, no matter how painful, could become lanterns, lighting a way through the darkness. And tonight, on the cold and windswept moor, hope felt stronger than regret. The weeks after the confession were a blur of movement and memory, as if the entire village had awakened from a long sleep. The post, once a forgotten relic crumbling into the heather, became the focus of the community's energy and care. It started with Jim and Laws, of course. Late nights writing letters to the council, phone calls to local media, meetings in the farmhouse kitchen over mugs of strong tea and plates of biscuits. But soon it grew beyond them. Veterans arrived in pairs and small groups, sleeves rolled up, laughter echoing across the moor as they cleared rubble and braced what remained of the old post's shell. Kids from the village painted bright banners, Carter's Post, for those forgotten and those who remember, and tied them to the wire fence. Families donated tools, lumber, and old photographs from attics, piecing together not just the post's story, but the memory of an entire generation whose voices had nearly been lost. Jade, Rita, Mike, and the rest of the support group started a new tradition. Every Saturday at noon, rain or shine, they'd meet at the site to share stories, check on the repairs, and remind each other that no one had to carry their burdens alone. The day of the memorial unveiling dawned clear and still, the sky washed clean after a hard night's rain. Laws woke early, nerves jangling, and wandered the farm in silence, watching the mist burn off the fields. Her legs still ached, a reminder of how close she'd come to losing everything. But she'd learned to see the pain as a marker, a scar of survival, not just suffering. As she fed Storm and checked the new lambs, she thought about her father, about all the years she'd spent running from this place. Coming home hadn't been easy, but for the first time, she was grateful she'd been called back. By mid-morning, a crowd gathered on the ridge. Old soldiers in regimental ties stood beside teenagers with cell phones, parents with toddlers, even council officials in bright vests. The North York moors stretched away in every direction, golden with late autumn grass, the air filled with a hush that felt like reverence. The observation post had been stabilized, a new steel roof patching the worst of the collapse, the inside cleared of debris, the walls cleaned and repainted. Jim, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit, waited by the new plaque covered in a Union Jack, clutching his speech in one hand and Albert's battered logbook in the other. Laws joined him, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. "Ready?" she whispered. Jim managed a crooked smile. "Ready as I'll ever be." As the crowd fell silent, the local vicar said a few words about memory, truth, and forgiveness. Mike read a letter from a soldier's family, one that had never been able to visit the site before now. Then Jim stepped up, voice steady but soft. "This place is called Carter's Post now, but it's not just for my family or Albert. It's for every name we don't know, every person lost to time, every story covered up by fear or shame. We can't change what happened here, but we can make sure no one has to carry it alone ever again." He paused, lifting the logbook. Albert was many things: brave, flawed, haunted by his choices, But in the end, he told the truth. That's all any of us can do. He pulled the cloth from the plaque, revealing the inscription, "To those forgotten and those who remember. Here we honor truth, courage, and the power of community." Applause rippled through the crowd, gentle at first, then swelling. Laws stepped up, her heart hammering, and spoke in a clear voice that surprised her. "When I came home, I thought I was just running from my own ghosts. But I found something here I didn't expect. People who cared enough to face the past, no matter how painful. Silence can bury wounds, but truth brings hope. This place, this community, shows that healing is possible, not just for one family or one village, but for all of us." Storm, as if on cue, walked through the gathered crowd, stopping in front of the plaque. A little boy, his hand tight in his mother's, reached out and stroked the pony's neck, whispering, "Thank you." The simplicity of it nearly undid Laws. Tears pricked her eyes as she looked around. The tough old farmers, the teenagers taking selfies, the mothers hugging their kids, the old soldiers standing straighter than they had in years. After the speeches, people lingered. Some left flowers or medals at the post. Others just sat on the low wall, talking quietly, remembering. Jim's cousins, who'd once tried to keep him away, clapped him on the shoulder, awkward but genuine. A reporter asked Laws for a comment, but she just smiled and pointed to the crowd. "That's the story," she said. "All of them." As the sun climbed higher, Laws wandered the edge of the field, thinking. She saw her father everywhere, in the stone walls, the worn gate, the shape of the hills. She wondered if he would be proud of her. She hoped so. She felt lighter, as if the farm, the post, even her own regrets had finally let her breathe. She realized she didn't have to keep running. The farm wasn't just a duty. It was a chance to build something new. In the weeks that followed, Laws turned her attention to the retreat for veterans. What started as an idea grew into a plan. Workshops in the barn, support groups in the kitchen, space for those who needed peace. Locals donated time, money, even livestock. Some offered stories, laughter and loss, hope and pain, woven into the fabric of a new community. Jim, too, found peace. He wrote an article about Albert, about Carter's Post, about the power of facing what hurts instead of hiding from it. His words were shared far beyond the moors. Messages arrived from across Britain, even abroad. "Thank you for telling the truth. Your courage helped me face my own history. Now I know I'm not alone." In the end, the biggest lesson was simple and deep. Facing the past, however ugly, freed them all to build something better. Silence had buried pain. Truth had unearthed hope. Laws and Jim's journey wasn't just about fixing what was broken, but about creating a legacy. One rooted in honesty, compassion, and the belief that together, even the deepest wounds could heal. Dusk fell slow and golden across the moors, long shadows reaching from the hills, as if the land itself wanted to hold on to the light just a little longer. Laws stood at the edge of Carter's Post, the newly unveiled plaque gleaming in the soft evening sun. The wind carried the smell of heather and earth, and somewhere down the slope, she could hear laughter from the retreat. Voices of veterans gathering for supper, the clatter of plates, music on a battered old speaker. It sounded like hope. Jim came up beside her, a familiar presence now. He wore his jacket open, hair ruffled by the breeze, and for once there was no tension in his shoulders. Storm, the wild-fell pony, grazed nearby, nostrils twitching at the scent of grass, his coat shining after a brushdown from a group of local kids. The farm, the post, the whole wide sky. It all seemed to breathe with possibility. Laws reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded letter. The paper creased and thumbed soft from hours of handling. She'd written it last night, sitting in the kitchen by lamplight, pouring out words she'd never said to her father, words she'd never managed to say to herself. She smoothed the page, reading it one last time. Dad, I never said goodbye the way I should have. I ran when things got hard, and I let my fears turn to silence. But I'm here now. I made it right, or as right as anyone can. You taught me to face the truth, even when it hurt, even when it meant standing alone. Maybe you knew I'd come back. Maybe you knew this place would save me, the way it's saving others now. I hope I made you proud. Love, Laws. She knelt by the plaque, tucking the letter into a crevice in the stone where wind and rain might find it, but where it felt like part of the place, not just a memory. Jim watched, eyes soft. You ready to go? He asked quietly. She nodded. Almost. She traced the words on the plaque with her finger, feeling the weight and lightness of them. To those forgotten, and those who remember. The three of them, Laws, Jim, and Storm, walked to the ridge as the sun dipped below the far hills, painting the sky in streaks of pink and purple. They stood together, letting silence speak for a while. Finally, Jim said, Funny, isn't it? We can't rewrite history, but we can face it. We can try to do better. Laws nodded, her gaze steady on the horizon. We can find strength in the people beside us. That's what makes all the difference. They watched as the first stars blinked to life, the sky deepening from lavender to velvet blue. The moor was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of voices, old and new, living and gone, woven together in a tapestry of loss, healing, and resilience. The retreat lights twinkled in the distance, warm and inviting. Soon, those inside would share stories and food, laughter and tears, each one adding to the legacy Laws and Jim had fought to build. Storm snorted softly, brushing up against Laws's shoulder as if reminding her she was still needed here, still part of the land's ongoing story. She smiled, scratching the pony's rough mane. Not bad for a girl who used to want nothing but to leave this place behind, she said, her voice gentle. Jim grinned. Not bad at all. You made something out of what everyone else wanted to forget. For a long time, they just stood there, letting the quiet settle. Then, as the air grew colder, Laws spoke, her voice clear and certain. I used to think scars were something to hide. Now I know they're proof you survived, that you cared enough to try again. She took a deep breath, feeling the truth of it echo in her chest. Jim looked over at her, his face open, vulnerable. What do we do now? He asked. Laws smiled. Now? We keep going. We help whoever comes next. We make sure this place never goes quiet again. In the days and weeks that followed, life at the retreat found its rhythm. Veterans came from across the country, some alone, some with families, all carrying stories etched deep into their bones. The kitchen filled with voices and the smell of strong coffee. People shared burdens they'd carried for years and found, in the listening, a kind of release. There were hard nights, of course, flashbacks and silent tears, mornings when the weight of the past seemed almost too much. But there was laughter, too, and the quiet satisfaction of work done together, fixing fences, tending the gardens, even repainting the old post one more time. Local schools brought students out for history lessons. Journalists visited, their cameras capturing the resilience of the place, the faces of those who'd made it happen. Letters poured in, thanks, confessions, stories from others who'd lived through war or silence or regret. Sometimes, in the early morning, Laws would walk the boundary of the farm with Storm at her side, letting the peace of the moor settle into her bones, feeling as if every breath carried both memory and hope. On the anniversary of the memorial's unveiling, the whole village gathered at Carter's Post. There were speeches, music, a new plaque for the wall. Jim read from Albert's logbook, voice strong and proud. Laws told the crowd about her journey, about leaving, about coming home, about how sometimes the hardest thing you can do is tell the truth. The crowd listened, some with tears, some with smiles, all changed by what the place had become. As the last notes of the evening song faded and the stars returned, Laws stood by the post, Jim and Storm beside her, and felt a deep, quiet certainty. She had faced her past, claimed her scars, and found her place, not just as her father's daughter, but as someone who had helped others find peace too. Before they left, Laws touched the letter she'd hidden in the stone. "We can't change what's gone," she said softly, "but we can honor it, and we can make sure no one has to walk through it alone." Jim nodded, and together they walked back toward the lights of the retreat, Storm's hooves gentle in the grass behind them. And so, under the open sky of the North York moors, the story closed, not with silence, but with a promise. For all who would come after, Carter's Post would stand, a beacon of truth, of courage, and of hope that never had to be hidden again.